Picture this. A baby is born in a small camp, 40,000 years ago. The mother holds the child, exhausted, relieved. But around her, the men of the tribe exchange glances. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone is thinking the same question. Whose child is this? Here is something that might surprise you. For the entire history of our species, every single birth, for millions of years, there was no way to know for certain. Not a guess, not a strong suspicion. Zero certainty. The mother always knows. She felt the child grow up inside her, but the father has never had one piece of evidence. If you can't be certain a child is yours, what do you do? Evolution found an answer, and it wasn't a kind one. It was surveillance. Anthropologists call it mate guarding, and it shows up across nearly every human culture that has ever been studied. A man stays physically close to his partner. He pays attention to who she talks to, who looks at her, who lingers too long near the camp. In some ancient societies, men would accompany their partners almost everywhere, not out of romantic devotion, but out of something closer to risk management. This wasn't written down as a rule. Nobody held a meeting and decided this was the strategy. It emerged the same way instincts always emerged. The men who guarded more closely had a slightly higher chance of raising children that were actually their own, and that behavior got passed down, generation after generation, baked into something that feels today indistinguishable from jealousy. But not every culture solved this problem the same way. In the Amazon rainforest, anthropologists studying the Bari people of Venezuela documented something that breaks almost every assumption modern people have about fatherhood. The Bari believe a child can have more than one biological father, not metaphorically, literally. They believe that if a pregnant woman has sex with multiple men during her pregnancy, each man contributes to making the baby. So instead of one father, a single child might be recognized as having 2, 3, sometimes 4 fathers. And here is the part that should genuinely surprise you. Researchers found that children with multiple recognized fathers had significantly higher survival rates than children with only one. Why? Because every man who believed he might be the father provided food, protection, and resources to that child. Modern science can now look directly into the past and check. Archaeologists excavating a Bronze Age burial site in Germany extracted ancient DNA from a group of skeletons buried together roughly 4,500 years ago. They expected to find a typical nuclear family. What they found instead was stranger. The DNA revealed a complex web of relationships, half-siblings, children, with different fathers buried side by side, and evidence suggesting that paternity within this group was at best loosely tracked. Similar studies on other ancient burial sites across Europe have turned up comparable results. Researchers are increasingly finding that the tidy one mother, one father, one set of children model we assume was always normal may have been far less universal in ancient societies than we ever imagined. Without DNA, without surveillance, without certainty, ancient humans relied on the only piece of physical evidence available to them: resemblance. He has my nose, she has my eyes. That's my father's chin, right there on his face. This wasn't just sentimental noticing. Evolutionary psychologists believe humans developed a heightened sensitivity to facial resemblance specifically because it served a real biological function. It was a crude but functional paternity test, built directly into human perception. Studies have shown something remarkable. Mothers and their relatives tend to comment on a baby's resemblance to the father far more often than they comment on resemblance to the mother, even when, objectively, the baby doesn't particularly resemble either parent more than the other. Some researchers believe this is not an accident, reinforcing the father's confidence and securing his continued investment in the child, regardless of whether the resemblance is actually real. For most of human history, paternity uncertainty was a biological inconvenience. Then agriculture arrived, roughly 12,000 years ago, and it became something far more dangerous, a legal and economic crisis. Once humans began farming the same plot of land for generations, owning livestock and accumulating wealth that could be inherited, the question of who is the father stopped being personal and became a matter of property law. If the wrong child inherited land, an entire family's resources could pass to someone with no biological connection at all. This is when many historians believe formal marriage systems, strict fidelity, and even practices like dowries and bride prices began intensifying dramatically. Earlier, more flexible arrangements around paternity, like those still practiced by groups such as the Bari, became far less compatible with a world built on private property. So how many people, across the entire span of human history, grew up believing the wrong man was their father? Modern researchers have actually tried to estimate this, and the number is one of the most debated figures in genetics. Early studies in the 20th century, often based on blood type mismatches, suggested rates of misattributed paternity as high as 10% in some populations. More recent and more rigorous DNA-based studies have pushed that estimate dramatically lower, typically between 1 and 3% in most modern societies. But here's the part worth sitting with. Even at the lower, more conservative estimate, that means millions of people walking around today in every country on Earth carry a father listed on a birth certificate who is not their biological father, and the overwhelming majority of them will never know. In 1985, the first DNA paternity test was performed in a courtroom in the United Kingdom. In a matter of weeks, it resolved a question that human beings had been wrestling with uncertainly and imperfectly for roughly 300,000 years. Think about the scale of that. Was humanity's long improvised answer to a question we finally solved with a cotton swab and a lab result. Our ancestors built entire social systems around a question they could never fully answer, and we walked around for 300,000 years not knowing. And somehow, that uncertainty didn't break us.